The sun had only just begun to stretch its arms across the vast grasslands of the Serenka. Its golden fingers ran through the high savanna grass, lit up the baobab trees like torches, and turned the mist above the river into a ribbon of fire. Everything breathed in light. The dawn chorus had begun, birds singing like prayers, insects humming, and far in the distance, the low bellow of a buffalo waking. But in the heart of it all, moving with the grace of wind through tall reeds, were 5 lionesses. The pride stepped lightly across the dew-covered plain. Their muscles flowed like water beneath sun-kissed coats. They moved not in hunger, but in ritual, their morning patrol. Each lioness scanned the distance for signs, zebra prints, vulture spirals, or the soft tremble of grass that could mean prey or danger. Luma followed at the rear. She was the youngest, not quite 2 years old, lean and curious, her mane barely beginning to fuzz around her neck. Her paws were large but clumsy. She had the strength of her bloodline, but not the wisdom, not yet. The world still held mystery for her, and that mystery constantly pulled at her. The pride moved with discipline, weaving through the golden maze of the grassland. But Luma's nose caught something. A scent. Sharp, unfamiliar, not prey, not predator, just strange. She slowed, fell back, sniffed the wind again. The others kept moving. Luma turned her head and followed the scent. Her paws made no sound over the soft earth. She ducked under a tall clump of grass, past an old termite mound, and skirted a dry patch of thorns. Her eyes locked on a dark shape half hidden beneath the grass, stone. Maybe. Her nostrils flared. She moved closer. The ground shifted under her front paw. There was no warning, no crack, no roar, just an instant of weightlessness, then nothing. Luma fell, a blur of air, dust, and pain, then darkness. Above, the grass stilled. Moments passed before the distant sound of the pride's low calls returned to the clearing. The oldest lioness, Amara, lifted her head sharply. She turned in a slow circle, her ears twitching. She called out, once, twice, 3 times. No answer. Then came the scent, faint but undeniable. Luma's scent, mingled with dust and fear. The lionesses moved quickly. They doubled back along their own trail, following the scattered prints of the young lioness. The sun had risen higher now, casting harsh shadows that sliced through the grass. Then they found it, a jagged hole in the earth, partially hidden by overgrowth and time. The well. Its stone mouth was broken and overgrown, a ruin from the world before theirs, man-made, long forgotten. One of the lionesses growled, uncertain. The others approached slowly, circling. Amara leaned forward, peering into the darkness. From below, a faint whimper. They all froze. The sound came again, a low, trembling cry. It was Luma. The lionesses roared, not in rage, but in anguish, a chorus of helplessness. Their voices rippled across the plains like thunder, startling birds into flight. They paced the edge of the well, claws scraping at stone, teeth bared, not against an enemy, but against the invisible barrier between them and their fallen kin. Amara lay down at the edge, her head hanging low over the rim. Her golden eyes scanned the darkness, but could see nothing. Below, Luma stirred. Pain bloomed in her right side. Dust clung to her fur. One back leg refused to move properly. She tried to stand, cried out instead. The well was deep, but not endless. Roots jutted from the walls like broken ribs. Faint light filtered down through the opening above. It was cold, damp. The air smelled of moss and forgotten things. She looked up. The rim was impossibly high. Above, the silhouettes of her pride flickered in and out of sight. She could hear them: Amara's steady breath, another's soft growl, the pacing of worried paws on stone. Luma let out a weak, rasping call. It was all she had. And the sound that came back from above gave her the will to try again. Above, the lionesses stayed. For hours, they waited, they watched, they called, but they could not reach her. The well was too deep, the sides too steep, and they had no hands, only claws that could grip prey. Not rescue kin. Still, they didn't leave. They would not. Amara stood watch as the sun rose high, casting the clearing in sharp heat. When one lioness went to drink, the others remained, eyes never leaving the hole in the ground. They called Luma's name not in words, but in sound. Vocal vibrations passed down from lioness to cub since time began. It was all they could do. Dusk, the savanna changed color. Gold turned to copper, then to deep bronze. Birds flew lower. The air thickened. And Luma slept, curled at the bottom of the well, wrapped in her own warmth. Her breath shallow but steady. She dreamed of tall grass, of the chase, of the hunt she had never truly known, and of a scent, strange, electric, older than the wind, the one that had led her here. Night, the stars blinked awake overhead. Still, the pride did not leave. They lay around the well in a silent circle, as if their presence could protect Luma from the cold and the dark and the fear that lived down there with her. Every few minutes, Amara let out a soft hum, a lullaby of the wild. And somewhere beneath them, Luma heard it. Even through pain, even through fear, she was not alone. This was only the beginning. But the moment had been marked. A step taken toward something ancient. A fall into the unknown. And above, 5 lionesses who would not abandon one of their own. Not to time. Not to ruin. Not to the night. The sun was just lifting over the low hills when Rudo stirred the tea leaves in his battered metal pot. The fire crackled beneath a tripod of stones outside his station, a squat concrete structure with chipped paint and a solar panel that sometimes worked. A kettle of water hissed on the coals, and a light breeze carried the scent of wet grass and acacia sap. Rudo sat cross-legged on the steps of the ranger outpost. Boots dusty, eyes sharp despite the early hour. He'd lived out here longer than he could remember. Some called him a legend. Others whispered he was more ghost than man. But to those who knew better, Rudo was exactly what the bush needed: steady, unshakable, and tuned into the wild like a second skin. He reached for his mug, steam rising in curls. When he heard it, a sound, not loud, not close, but strange. A lion's roar, but not the kind he knew. Rudo had heard thousands in his life, territorial calls, warning growls, the deep-chested thunder of a male defending his pride. This was different. It rose like a wave but cracked halfway through, as if caught between power and grief. It wasn't a challenge. It wasn't even a cry for help. It was mourning, urgent, raw. He set the mug down. No hesitation. Rudo stood, stepped inside the outpost, and opened the old green locker near his cot. Inside was a field pack, always ready, along with a coiled rope, a medkit, and a headlamp. He grabbed them all. Next came the radio, though the signal in this part of Serenka was more wish than certainty. As he checked the rope and clipped the pack shut, he muttered to himself, "Not a usual morning." Then, he didn't waste time guessing what it might be. The bush didn't give you answers until it wanted to. But he trusted his instincts. And right now, they buzzed like wasps behind his ribs. He locked the station behind him and started walking. The savanna spread out before him in layers of shadow and light. The grass was still wet with morning, and small herds of impala scattered at his approach. Rudo walked with a purpose, silent, efficient, every step practiced. He moved not like someone traveling through the wild, but like someone moving with it. He followed the direction of the sound, northeast, toward the ancient ridge near the dry river bend. He passed a crumbling stone marker, a relic from before the preserve was protected. He moved past the familiar trails and into taller, denser grass. And then, more sounds. Not a roar this time. Something else. Low growls, movement, heavy pacing. He slowed, crouched near a rise, and raised his binoculars. Below him was a shallow depression in the land. At its center, a broken stone well, half buried in time, and around it, lionesses. 4 of them, adult, powerful. Their bodies were coiled and tense, but not aggressive. They circled the mouth of the well in silence, then broke into low cries. Their behavior was unusual, restless, anxious, almost desperate. Then he heard it again. From below the well, a whimper, faint, not the sound of a trapped gazelle or a crying cub. Something heavier. Rudo's eyes narrowed. One of the lionesses lay at the rim, nose pressed toward the dark. Another pawed gently at the edge, sending pebbles tumbling downward. He exhaled slowly. So that's it. He didn't need to guess anymore. Something had fallen in, and from the lioness's behavior. It wasn't prey. It was one of their own. Rudo didn't move suddenly. He knew how fast a lion could turn from panic to defensive. But something about these 4 told him they knew what he was. Not friend, not threat, just present. He stood up slowly, making his approach known with soft clicks of his tongue. The lionesses watched him. 2 stood. 1 growled, not a warning, more like an announcement. Rudo raised both hands and kept walking. When he reached the well, he circled wide until he was beside the largest lioness, the one he guessed was the matriarch. She looked up at him once. Her eyes were dark and rimmed with age. But not fear. He nodded at her like an old comrade. Then stepped forward and peered in. Darkness. but from deep below, he heard breathing, shallow, raspy. He pulled the headlamp from his pack and clicked it on, angling the beam down. At the bottom of the well, wedged between a rock and the crumbling wall, lay a young lioness, not yet full grown, injured, alone. "Poor girl," he whispered. She didn't growl, didn't move, just blinked up at him, eyes wide with exhaustion and trust. Rudo stepped back and assessed the rope. He anchored one end to a half-buried tree root nearby. He double-checked the knot, tight. Tested, strong. Then he unzipped the medkit and clipped it to his belt. He didn't need to think twice. Down he went. The descent was slow. The stone walls were slick with moss in some places, cracked in others. The rope creaked under his weight. As he neared the bottom, the lioness shifted, not out of fear, but from the slight gust of air stirred by his approach. Rudo dropped the final few feet and landed in a crouch. They stared at each other. The well was silent. Then he moved, slowly, carefully, toward her. She didn't flinch, even as he reached out and touched her flank, fingers moving gently over the matted fur, checking for bone breaks and gashes. One back leg was swollen and stiff. Her ribs were bruised, but she would live. He said nothing, just worked. With soft hands, he cleaned the wound, wrapped it, checked her eyes, gave her water from a small bottle. All the while, she watched him, not with fear, but with something deeper, like she remembered something inside her bones, like she knew what it meant to be helped by a man who asked for nothing in return. Above, the lionesses were waiting. One paced, the others lay down, heads resting on crossed paws. Then, the first tug on the rope. Rudo called up in short clicks. The lionesses didn't respond, but they stayed, one by one. Rudo rigged a sling beneath the young lioness's chest. Not perfect, but safe enough. He wrapped her good leg to steady her body. "All right," he said, "let's get you home." It took time. He braced the line, hoisted gently, guided the sling, and inch by inch, the lioness rose. When she reached the rim, the lionesses stepped back. No panic, no chaos, only presence. As if they'd known all along he would bring her back. Rudo climbed out after her, panting. The young lioness lay in the grass, breathing steady. Her sisters circled her. They sniffed, licked her wounds, rubbed against her body, and the matriarch, Amara, lifted her eyes once to Rudo. They held each other's gaze for a long, silent moment. Then the pride moved on. Slowly, one injured, four strong. Together. Rudo didn't follow. He stood there in the golden grass, sweat cooling on his brow, the silence folding around him once again. He reached into his pack, lifted the now cold mug of tea, and finally took a sip. It tasted like earth and wonder. The heat of mid-morning settled over the Serenka, and the tall grass swayed under a soft breeze. Insects clicked from the underbrush, and birds circled lazily above. The world, in all its rhythms, moved on, but not here, not at the mouth of the old stone well. Here, time had stopped. Four lionesses stood like statues around the well's crumbling rim. Their bodies were taut but unmoving. their ears turned forward, and their golden eyes fixed downward, not with hunger, nor curiosity, but something far more unsettling. Urgency. They did not growl, they did not roar, they waited. Rudo watched them carefully as he approached. He had dealt with prides before, challenges, bluff charges, wary retreats, but this was different. These lionesses held no tension of attack in their muscles. They didn't pace, they didn't snarl, they stood like silent guards around something sacred. He raised his hands as he moved closer, just enough for them to register his presence as deliberate, not aggressive. Their eyes flicked toward him and then back to the darkness of the well. The message was clear. She's down there. Rudo stepped beside the matriarch. Amara. Her breath was steady. Her tail flicked once, then stilled. He looked at her, and she did not turn her head. But he felt her awareness like heat from a flame. He moved to the edge and looked down. What he saw there stopped his breath in his chest. A pair of amber eyes, shining faintly in the half-light. Luma, the young lioness, was lying at the bottom. Her fur streaked with dust and blood. One hind leg was twisted unnaturally, and her breathing was shallow. But her eyes were alive. Watching, waiting. Rudo adjusted the beam of his headlamp and crouched lower, hoping to get a clearer view. Then, it happened. Luma shifted. She winced, dragged her weight upward, and lifted her front legs, stretching them toward the light, toward the opening, toward him. Two forepaws reached up from the dark like arms from the earth. It wasn't a lunge. It wasn't aggression. It wasn't instinct. It was plea, a gesture that broke every rule of predator and prey. No snarl, no fight, no attempt to flee, just a silent, aching motion. Help me. Rudo froze. He had seen animals trapped, wounded, dying. He had seen lions defending their pride, mothers growling over their cubs, and males tearing each other apart in dusty duels for dominance. He had seen animals kill, and animals run, but he had never seen this. Not from a lion, not from anything wild. And then, she looked up at him. Their eyes locked. It was more than a glance. It was a bridge. Her gaze wasn't wild. It wasn't desperate in a mindless way. It was searching, intelligent, trusting. And Rudo, kneeling at the edge of that well, understood something that had no words. There were no fences between them. No guns, no fear, just two beings, face to face, each scarred by life in different ways, and each choosing not to look away. He whispered her name, though she had never given it. Luma. The sound of it carried downward like a leaf falling. The lioness blinked slowly. The muscles in Rudo's chest tightened. Not with fear, but with responsibility, with recognition. He had to go down there. Not to save an animal. To answer a call. He anchored the rope again. Tighter this time. Double-checked the knots. He clipped a light to his belt and lowered the medkit in a sling first, watching it settle beside her. Then he descended. The rope creaked. The walls narrowed. Cool air kissed his neck as the sun faded behind him. Luma watched his every move. Her breath audible now, steady but heavy. When he reached the bottom, He didn't speak. He crouched nearby, close enough to feel the warmth of her body, but not close enough to frighten her. She didn't move away. She didn't snarl. She didn't try to hide her injury. She just watched him. So he moved slowly, speaking softly, not in commands, but comfort. "You're hurt. I'm going to help. Don't panic. I've got you." His hands moved with care honed by decades in the bush. He reached into the kit, pulled out gauze, antiseptic, tape. The wound on her leg was not fresh. It had swelled badly, and a gash across the joint was still bleeding. He dabbed. She flinched. He stopped. She didn't attack. He continued. As he wrapped the leg, he whispered again, "You're strong. You've made it this far." And somewhere in the quiet, in the gloom of the well, something passed between them. He couldn't explain it. A shift, like being allowed into a secret only the wild knows. Above, the lionesses had not moved. They sat, facing the well, still watching, still waiting. And then, the rope tightened. Rudo had fashioned a crude sling beneath Luma's belly, securing her limbs as gently as possible. She didn't resist. She let him work. When he attached the hoist, he felt her weight settle into the line like trust itself. He called out once, just a sound. The wind carried it. He pulled. Slowly, inch by inch, the sling lifted. Luma rose from the pit. A lioness carried on human strength. Not as a trophy, not as a victim, but as a companion in survival. When they reached the top, the lionesses stood. Amara stepped forward first. No growl, no charge. She pressed her nose to Luma's shoulder, breathing her scent, inspecting the leg, then stepped back. The others took turns. And then, all five stood side by side. Alive, whole, together. Rudo climbed out after them. He stood silently as the pride formed around Luma. She leaned against one sister, limped beside another. The circle closed, not to shut him out, but to take her home. Amara looked back once. Just once. Rudo nodded. The matriarch blinked, and they disappeared into the grass. He stood there for a long time. The wind moved around him. The rope swayed slightly, still tied to the root. Dust rose and settled again. Somewhere, far away, the call of a hornbill echoed. But inside him, nothing stirred, except awe, and something he hadn't felt in years. Faith. Not in man, not in beast, but in the space between. The wind had shifted. Clouds gathered on the edge of the sky, trailing their shadows across the savanna. The heat of midday softened into a dense, silent pressure, as if even the earth was holding its breath. At the old well, Rudo knelt in the grass, fingers tightening around the rough coils of rope. His eyes never left the lioness in the pit below. There was no time for radio calls or waiting on help that might never come. The longer Luma stayed down there, the higher the risk of infection, shock, or collapse. Her strength wouldn't last much longer. Neither would his window. The four lionesses still stood their vigil, unmoving sentinels around the well. Not one had growled or blocked his path. It was as if they knew he was the only one who could reach her, and more than that. They had allowed him to try. He slung the rope around his waist and chest. Then tied the knot the way he'd done 100 times before in tree rescues and poacher pursuits. But this wasn't routine. This was balance on the edge of impossible. He knelt, braced his boots into the cracked stone, and inched forward until his chest was almost level with the rim. The drop below looked steeper than before. Or maybe it was just the weight of what he was about to do. "All right, girl," he muttered under his breath. "This is going to hurt both of us." He leaned in and reached. His hand slid down into the cool shadow of the well, open. Vulnerable, trembling not from fear, but anticipation. Below, Luma shifted. Her body trembled as she raised her head. Her breath was ragged, the fur along her flanks streaked with grime and dried blood. But her eyes remained clear. She saw him, and more importantly, she recognized him. No sudden movement, no sound, just slow, careful motion as she extended one paw upward. Claws retracted. Pads worn but firm. Then, she touched him. Her front paw pressed gently into his hand. Her weight balanced but restrained. As if she knew how fragile the moment was. Rudo swallowed. The contact wasn't rough. It wasn't wild. It was deliberate. Her paw in his hand. His hand in hers, beast and man. Predator and protector, bound by nothing but a silent pact in the heat of danger. He tightened his grip. She didn't pull away. With a grunt, he shifted his weight backward, anchoring his boots hard against the ground. The rope pulled taut across his chest. Sweat beaded on his forehead and rolled down his spine. Every inch of muscle fought against the downward pull of her weight. Luma was no cub. This was hundreds of pounds of raw muscle and wounded pride. And he was just one man. But she trusted him. And he would not let that trust fall. He gritted his teeth and began to pull. One arm locked. The other reached lower. She climbed. Not with power. But obedience. Her back legs scrambled against the stone. Barely finding purchase, she whimpered once. A soft, strained sound that made Rudo push harder. His boots slipped an inch. He drove his heels down again, digging deep into the dirt. The rope burned against his skin. His arms shook. The lionesses above tensed. But they didn't move. They watched. They waited. And Luma climbed. Every inch gained was a battle. Rudo's vision blurred from effort. His breath came in bursts. His hands began to cramp. "Come on, girl," he gasped, voice hoarse. "Just a little more." Then, her front paws crested the lip. Her claws dug into the edge. With one final surge, Rudo threw his weight backward, pulling with everything left in him. Luma collapsed onto the grass. Half in, half out, he scrambled forward and lifted her final leg with both arms, dragging her fully free of the well's throat. Then he fell back, chest heaving, the rope slack around him. For a moment, neither of them moved. Man and lioness, side by side, sprawled in exhaustion on the warm earth. Rudo turned his head slowly. Luma was breathing hard, ribs rising and falling, tongue lolling slightly from her mouth. Her eyes were open but glazed. But she was alive. And above her, the pride stepped forward. Amara came first. approaching with slow, steady confidence. She leaned down and nuzzled Luma's shoulder, her nose brushing gently against matted fur. Then she began to lick long, slow strokes of her rough tongue over Luma's face and ears, as if cleaning away both the grime and the fear. The others followed. They circled her, forming a living shield of warmth and presence. They nuzzled her, sniffed her, touched her with their bodies, not to assert dominance, but to welcome her back. One licked the wound on her leg. Another rested her chin on Luma's flank. The youngest of them lay down beside her, head against her side, their breathing synchronizing. It was a ceremony without ritual, a reunion without words. And Rudo, watching from a short distance, felt his throat tighten. He didn't rise. He didn't intrude. He simply sat there, body aching, hands trembling, and witnessed what no human had likely ever witnessed before. A pride of lions embracing their wounded with tenderness that defied every expectation. Every rule of nature. No one had taught them this. It was born in them. And Luma, alive, broken, but whole, was at the center of it. She turned her head once and looked back at him. Their eyes met, not for long, not like before, but long enough. And in that single glance was everything: gratitude, memory, recognition. Then she closed her eyes and rested her head in the grass. Rudo stood up at last. His knees ached, his arms felt like clay. But his heart was steady. He didn't need to touch her again. He didn't need to linger. The bond had been forged, not in words, not in ownership, but in a moment of total surrender and shared struggle. As he walked away, he left the rope tied to the root, left the well behind, let it return to history. The lions would not follow. They had their sister back. And he had something even more rare, a trust earned not by domination, but by belief. Belief that sometimes, the wild doesn't need taming. It just needs to be heard. The wind had softened. Clouds drifted lazily above the Serenka, casting slow shadows that stretched across the plains like sleepy spirits. The sun tilted gently toward the west, and the long grass whispered as it swayed. Rudo stood a few paces back from the pride. His boots sunk into the warm earth, arms slack at his sides. His body ached, his shirt clung to his back with sweat, and his chest still rose and fell heavily, but his heartbeat wasn't frantic. It wasn't fear that made his hands tremble. It was something deeper, something holy. Before him, the lionesses gathered around Luma, who now lay curled in the grass, breathing evenly. Her wound had stopped bleeding, and her body, while battered, was safe, surrounded by the warmth and weight of her sisters. It was a scene of raw, wordless care, the kind passed down through instincts older than memory, and they had let him be part of it, not as an intruder, not as a threat, as a witness. As Rudo began to step back, he moved slowly, deliberately, careful not to break the unspoken pact. His boots made no sound. The lionesses turned their heads toward him in unison. Still no growl, still no teeth, just eyes, golden, still, watching. They did not follow. They did not stop him. They simply stood and watched. like guardians who had nothing to guard against anymore. He paused one last time. Then Luma lifted her head. Their eyes met. One final moment across the breadth of wild grass and unspeakable experience. Her gaze was not the wild look of a hunted animal. It was not confusion, not fear. It was knowing. You've stepped into our story. That's what Rudo saw in her eyes. Not as words, but as truth. He gave her a soft nod. She blinked, slow and sure, then turned back to her pride. And just like that, it was done. The moment passed, but it would never truly leave. In the days that followed, Rudo returned to the ranger station with more silence than stories. He wrote the report. Of course. Detailed, honest, clear, but some things didn't make it onto the page. The way Luma reached for him. The weight of her paw in his hand. The way 4 lionesses trusted a man with the life of one of their own. Some truths can't be recorded. They can only be remembered. Weeks later, a conservation team came to the site. At Rudo's request, the old well was carefully, respectfully filled, not erased, but made safe. Stone by stone, they sealed the pit that had once swallowed a young lioness and returned something greater. Rudo didn't help with the tools. He stood nearby, arms crossed, watching, when the last rock settled into place and the earth was smoothed over. He walked to the center and placed one hand on the ground. Not to claim it, to thank it. From then on, he returned, not every day, not to check or patrol. Just to be there. He'd bring his tea, sit on a flat stone near where the well had been, and let the grass speak. Sometimes he heard birds, sometimes just wind, sometimes he heard nothing, and that silence was the deepest sound of all. On certain days, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, he'd catch movement in the brush, a ripple in the grass, a flicker of gold, the pride, always distant, never threatening, just present, watching him as he watched them. He never called to them. He never approached. He didn't need to. He had already stepped into their story once. That was enough. In time, the other rangers began to notice changes. Fewer incidents near the ridge. Less fear in the wildlife there. A strange peace seemed to settle over that part of the reserve. The locals said the lions had become like shadows, appearing and vanishing, guarding the edge of the wild-like spirits of the old world. Rudo never corrected them. He understood. They weren't just animals anymore. They were gatherers of memory, keepers of silence, and in their silence was a kind of eternal gratitude. One evening, as the stars unfolded across the sky, a young ranger sat beside Rudo at the old well site. "I don't get it," the young man said. "Why do you come back here? There's nothing left. The well's gone. The lions, if they're even around, they don't need us." Rudo sipped his tea, waited, then said, "They don't need us." Pause. "They remembered us." The young ranger blinked. "You mean, you?" Rudo smiled softly. "I mean someone was there when it mattered. And that doesn't fade." He looked out across the brush, eyes narrowing at a distant movement, too low to be wind, too smooth to be bird. "They don't forget the ones who showed up," he said, "even once." That night, after the young ranger had gone, Rudo remained alone. The wind tugged at his sleeves. He poured the last of his tea into the soil. And as he stood to leave, he turned one last time. There, barely visible in the fading light, were 5 shapes. Low, still, golden, the pride. They didn't move, they didn't growl, just stood, watching, silent, like ghosts made of dust and moonlight. Rudo touched his heart with one hand. Not a wave, not a goodbye, just recognition, and then he walked back into the dark, leaving behind only footprints and something deeper. Epilogue. There are moments that don't make headlines. No cameras, no applause. Just 2 beings meeting in the space between instinct and understanding. Where claws pause before striking. Where a hand reaches instead of recoiling. Where a lioness lifts her paw. And a man catches it. No words spoken. No promises made. Only one truth. Trust doesn't always need language. Sometimes it needs only a look, and a hand offered at the right moment.
Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, please comment 1. And if you didn't, just hit like. See you in the next videos.